Hi everybody, Natasha Butler, James Cook University Marketing Lecturer. And today in this week's Marketing Matters BU1108 or BU2108 lecture, we're talking marketing research and information systems. So this is week 4 and video 2. And in this video, we'll be discussing the market research process. In our previous video, we discussed what marketing research is and why businesses undertake it. But now we're up to video 2, so let's have a look at what the process is for gathering market research. So there is a 5-step process that we go through when we are looking at undertaking research. Step 1 is we determine the scope for the marketing research. We then select the research design, collect and prepare the data. Then we analyse that data before finally transforming the analysis results into insights. So to maintain the control needed to actually gather accurate information, marketers approach marketing research as a process that has logical steps to it. Now, these steps should be viewed as an overall approach in conducting research rather than a rigid set of rules that need to be followed in each project. So let's look at step 1, determining the research scope. So this step is where we're going to uncover the nature and the boundaries related to the marketing strategy or implementation. So what is it that we're wanting to discover? What's going on for us? So we might be wanting to research any departures from normal or expected marketing results. We might be wanting to research or determine why there are typical problems that we have in our organisation that therefore requires research for us to identify that. It could be because we're wanting to discover reasons for either exceeding or not meeting goals. Maybe we're wanting to identify some evidence of possible or potential new market opportunities. And then once we've identified that problem, we need to define the nature or the scope of the situation. So where are we now and why do we want to undertake this research? We want to have a very clear definition of this research need. And this is really important because it's best when undertaking research, we want to have a very clear and narrow focus and definition of what it is that we're wanting to do rather than really wide, because that can create some issues for us when undertaking the research and more so getting to the actual results. We need to determine precisely what our research is to uncover. And then we need to decide, how is this research going to be used? Because we don't want to do it if there's no purpose. So we undertake marketing research, and that first step is identifying clearly what it is we want to achieve. What is it that we don't know right now that we're wanting to find out a little bit more about? So once we've done that, we then select the research design. So let's have a look at that now. So when we select the research design, this is now where we're looking at the overall plan that we're going to use to obtain that data needed to address the problem or the issue. So this step requires determining what type of research is going to be most appropriate for answering our research question. And the nature and the type of research varies based on the research design and the hypothesis that we have under investigation. Now, a hypothesis is an informed guess or an assumption about a certain problem or a certain set of circumstances. So we may think we know what's going on in the marketplace, but undertaking research will confirm what we know or what we don't know. So marketers may elect to conduct either exploratory, descriptive, or experimental research. And whilst each has distinct purposes, the major differences between them are formalization and flexibility rather than the methods that are used. So let's have a look at those 3 in more detail. So exploratory research is when marketers need more information about a problem, or else they want to make a tentative hypothesis more specific. And honestly, I think everybody has undertaken exploratory research at some stage because we're wanting to get a better understanding of a problem or a situation so we can help identify additional data needs or decision alternatives think you've undertaken descriptive exploratory research before, just even if it is looking for a place to go and eat. You've got on Google before to do some exploratory research to find out some venues that might be available to you. So I think you've got a bit of an idea about this. So it's about it's about gathering more data about a problem so that we can make that hypothesis or that assumption that we have a bit more specific. And it helps us understand that problem or that situation. So something that from a business perspective that we might be looking at is how consumers' purchase habits changing. So are people buying more, buying less, and along those types of lines. Now, descriptive research is when we're wanting to understand the characteristics of certain phenomena to solve a specific or a particular problem. So this is conducted to clarify the characteristics of certain phenomena and thus solve a certain problem. So the problem that we might have is, how are consumers gathering their information to assist in their buying? And therefore we're able to solve our problem by undertaking that research. So that's descriptive research. So where we clarify the characteristics of that certain phenomena and thus solve the problem. So what's going on there? Finally, we might undertake experimental research, and this allows marketers to make causal deductions about relationships. So in experimentation, it means that we have an independent variable, so one that's not influenced by anything else. And then we have our variable ones that are manipulated and change, and where we change the conditions. So then we can measure the effect on what those changes had versus our dependent variable. So an example of this might be, we might be looking at the results of sales in stores if we display stock differently, or if we use different packaging for our product. So we can have our control product, and then we can have our variable product, is what we're looking at with experimental research. So basically we're doing an experiment to see what works better. So then when we're selecting, after we've selected our research design, we also need to consider whether we're going to undertake quantitative or qualitative research. And let's have a look at the differences between both now. So quantitative research is used in descriptive and experimental researches. It yields a quantitative data or numerical information for us. And generally we would collect quantitative data through structured questionnaires or surveys. Whereas qualitative research is really descriptive in nature. We use it often in exploratory research, and it gives us qualitative data, and that means it's non-numerical. And the common techniques of this is, maybe we gather this from focus groups, observations, and interviews. And we're going to look at these types of research in a little bit more detail as we move through. But for me, the way that I always remember the two is that we were either looking for quantity or quality, and both have benefits and some negative aspects to their type of research. Quantitative research is really easy to gather and to analyse, whereas qualitative research gives us some really in-depth and interesting insights. So quite often we'll use a combination of both when we're undertaking our research. So after we've considered whether we are the types of questions that we're going to collect, or the types of data using qualitative or quantitative research, we then need to ensure the reliability and validity of what it is that we're collecting. So a research technique has reliability if it produces an almost identical result in repeated trials. So if we can repeat it over and over and over again, that means that we can expect that the research is reliable. And that's important because we want to make sure our research is reliable. And we also need to ensure that it has validity as well. And that means that it is measuring what it's supposed to measure and not something else. And then we also have generalizability, and that's not quite listed here, but that refers to how much the research can be generalized to the broader population. So it's all good that our research might be reliable, so it is accurate and is showing us the same outcome over and over again, but not if it's not telling us what it is that we're looking to determine. So we need to ensure that it's telling us what we want to know and it can be replicated so that it's accurate. So we've now determined the scope for marketing research and we've looked at the research design. Now we're going to look at how we collect and prepare our data. So when it comes to collecting and preparing our data, there's a number of different types of market research that we can look at. We have tertiary data that we can collect, and that's where we're looking at internally. So financial records from our organisation, sales records, maybe our customer relationship management system there. So this is all company records. We could also undertake primary research, and primary research is tailor-made and specific to our needs or purposes. Or else we can have secondary research, and secondary research is research that's been created for some other purpose, but we're able to use that research for our purposes, or we're able to access the outcomes of that research for our own purposes. So some of the interesting primary data sources is that we get primary data sources come from consumers or customers who provide us direct answers on the business question, on the business in question. And that's either through surveys, face-to-face interviews, focus groups, customer feedback. And then we collect that to address that specific problem. So primary research addresses a specific problem that cannot be answered by secondary data alone. Whereas secondary data is data that's already been collected for another purpose, and we're able to access that. So that could be things such as reports and statistics that are held by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, industry publications, social media websites, marketing and consumer lists, etc. So let's have a look at some sources of secondary data. So we can have some great sources of secondary data that that businesses use quite often to help them in their business, in their decision making, is things such as the CIA World Book. And that is a collection of global information such as population sizes, different economies, GDPs, etc. So there's a really great wealth of information there if you are looking at expanding into a different country. Locally, looking at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the Australian Bureau of Statistics collects data through the census that has been put out every 4 years, and that collects a whole lot of really interesting insights on the demographics of the Australian population. So that tells us things such as age brackets and where people live and how they live, incomes, lifestyle habits, etc. And so what's going on then in specific communities, we may be able to get that information. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics is definitely a website I use really often when I'm conducting my market research. Then we have ID Consulting. Now, ID Consulting, again, I use this place often as well. So that uses the data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, but drills it down to a more local level. So, for example, we're able to see exactly what's going on for the populations of Townsville or Cairns or Mackay or other areas across Australia. And it drills down really quite deeply to tell us, well, how many people do own their home in this particular suburb. So again, drills down really deep, looking at council areas with some great demographics. Then we've got more broader or industry type research publication or websites such as IBISWorld or Statistica. And these collect research from across the globe in different areas that might interest us. So for example, we might be entering into a new market and we might want to know the size of, or how many people own pets in Australia, or what the size of that market is. IBISWorld or Statistica will be able to help us with that information. Nielsen data, again, is a really interesting place to have a look because that shares or that monitors monitors media consumption habits. So such as I use it quite often. I find it really fascinating looking at what types of digital tech is currently being used across Australia each month is one of the things that they measure. They also look at are people using streaming services or watching paid TV or free-to-air TV, listening to different things on digital radio or free-to-air radio. So it gives us a bit of a view on what the population's media consumption is like. Then you've got information that's happening at a local level for you. And this can be really important because, if just to get a bit of an idea on what's happening locally. So you've got Chamber of Commerce websites. They often put out yearly reports and insights into business confidence. How are people feeling? Are they looking at employing or investing in the area? You've also got newspaper articles too. So the media is one of the best places to access secondary data because it tells us what's happening in the world at the moment, what changes are taking place, such as with trends and interest rates or consumer confidence. And the final place where we can go to collect data is online. So TripAdvisor, Google reviews, Facebook reviews, etc., can all give us some really interesting and in-depth research. And this is something that you will definitely be accessing when it comes to assess your next your business situation, your business analysis for a later assessment. And if you look in the textbook too, table 4.1 has some really great lists of some sources of secondary data. So when we're looking then back at our primary data, so when we collecting secondary data, it's pretty easy to do because it's really accessible. So it can be a really, we can collect data and collect that information and make a decision based on the information that we've from the research that we've done reasonably quickly. When it comes to undertaking primary data or collecting primary research, it's a little bit more of a lengthier process because we're going out to market to clarify or get information or research about something that isn't known before. So it's a little bit more of a lengthy and expensive and a complex process than working with secondary data. So when we go out to collect our primary data, one of the things that we do is look at sampling procedures because we do have limited resources on time and money. And so it's impossible for us to investigate all the members of our target audience or the entire population. So the population includes all the elements, units, or individuals of interest to researchers for a specific study. So if you consider, if you're wanting to get an understanding around every person in Australia's thoughts about a particular topic or their thoughts on their buying habits, that's really a massive process and project, and it just wouldn't really be feasible. So that's why we choose a limited number of units, or we take out what we call a sample. And the sample is used to represent the characteristics of the total population. And by doing that, researchers can project the reactions of the total market or the market segment. And the term sampling is used in market research as that process of selecting representative units from a total population. And we usually employ sampling techniques when we're undertaking that market research, just because it's such a big task to research the entire population. Oops, moving on. Then when it comes to our sampling, we have probability sampling and non-probability sampling. So when we're looking at probability sampling, that means every element in the population being studied has a known chance of being selected for the study. Where if it's a non-probability sampling, there is no way to calculate the likelihood that a specific element of the population being studied will be chosen. Oops. So for example, probability sampling is that, but there's a 50% chance that that a female or a male can be selected for this study. Whereas non-probability sampling means that there's just no way to calculate. We just don't know what that sampling or that element of the population is going to be. So with our probability sampling, we can have random sampling, and that means all units in the population have an equal chance of appearing in the sample. We can have stratified sampling, and that's where the population is divided into groups according to a common attribute, and then a random sample is then chosen within each group. We can have cluster sampling, and that's where natural clusters within the population are used to facilitate that sample selection, such as a postcode. And then we have quota sampling, and that's where researchers divide the population into groups and then just arbitrarily choose participants from each group. And then when it comes to collecting our primary data, we look at either exploratory methods, descriptive methods, or descriptive survey methods, or observational methods. So let's have a look at those three now. So when looking at exploratory methods, this is where we're wanting to focus on discovering the ideas and insights, so that qualitative information rather than collecting quantitative data. So we might conduct focus groups or focus group interviews, and that's when we've got members of that group exposed to an idea or a concept, such as us all sitting in a classroom together, and I ask your ideas on certain things. We have customer advisory boards, and that's small groups of actual customers who provide feedback on ideas, products, marketing strategies. And then we have in-depth interviews, and that might be a phone or a face-to-face interview that kind of combines the traditional focus group, but we're able to go a little bit deeper and get more information out that may not be influenced by the focus group, because sometimes we can get groupthink in a focus group. And also too, people might be a little bit more willing to share their thoughts and insights or their behaviours if it's a little bit more confidential. But again, as you can appreciate, looking at those three, they're quite in-depth and can be detailed and lengthy to undertake this type of research. And then how do we go about measuring that too? So that's why qualitative data is so valuable and so insightful, is because it gives us some really in-depth information, but sometimes it can be really hard for us to measure. Whereas our descriptive survey methods is where we're really looking more so at that quantitative data. So we might have mail surveys where we send out a questionnaire through usually email or digital marketing. We might then phone people up and just say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, can you tell me what your thoughts are on this? Or we might still have a personal interview survey. So, such as somebody in a shopping centre, just saying, hey, look, can I just grab 2 seconds of your time today? Can you let me know your thoughts on this? And it's just really quick question and answers, so that we can get some information really quickly. But then when it comes to constructing our questionnaire, we need to ensure that our questions are very clear, that they're easy to understand, and they are directed towards our specific objective. One of the most common mistakes in constructing questionnaires is that researchers ask questions that they're interested in, but they don't actually yield information that's useful in deciding whether to accept or reject a hypothesis. So it's really important to remain neutral and focused on what the objective is. And the quality of the questions is really important too, because if you have poor questions, then you are going to get poor results. So make sure that your questions are clear and easy to understand. Ensure that those questions directly answer the research objectives. Maintain impartiality of questions, and just be careful around sensitive questions too. So make sure that they're worded in a way that's less offensive. And there's 3 types of questions we can have. We can have open-ended questions, dichotomous or multiple choice questions. And we need to be careful about the types of questions that a respondent might consider too personal, and they might require an admission of activities that other people might be likely to condemn. So in your textbook in table 4.3, there is some examples of open-ended, dichotomous or multiple choice questions. And generally we would use a combination of all types and some open-ended questions too, to give us some quantitative data as well when we're conducting our research. next type of research method is observational methods, and this is exactly what you're doing for your blog assessment. So, in using observation methods, research record individuals' overt behaviour, taking note of physical conditions and events. And direct contact with the subjects is generally avoided unless it's in a realistic situation. So, observation may include some use of ethnographic techniques, such as watching customers and how they interact with a product in a real world environment. It might also, we also look at that, those physical conditions, the subject actions, and the demographics in that environment are also noted too. So, data gathered through observation can sometimes be a little bit biased if the person is aware that they are being observed. I mean, you think about it, how would you feel if you're in a store shopping and know that you are being watched and all of your actions are being written down? So, we need to be careful of that too, so that we don't sort of um, influence a person's behaviour. So the observer can be placed in a natural market environment, such as in a grocery store, with and in a way that doesn't influence a shopper's actions. Observation, it's pretty straightforward, and it avoids one of the central problems of survey methods, and that is we need to motivate people to tell us their true feelings or their opinions. However, it's again really quite descriptive, and which means that it can be a little bit trickier to try to analyse that data because it is qualitative data. So, but it is a really great way of collecting data and to get a feel around what's going on in the marketplace. So we've now looked at, we've determined the scope of our research, we've selected the research design, and we've looked at the different types of data that's available to us. So some different secondary sources that we can access, such as that businesses access to give them insights. And then we've looked too at how we would undertake conducting primary research. So now that we've collected our data, we need to analyse it so we can identify those aha moments and make those, be able to make those really important decisions in our business. So when it comes to analysing the data, we're looking at that statistical interpretation. So we want to do an analysis of what is typical or what deviates from the average. Do we wanting to look to see if there is any relationships between data or data sets, such as is there a relationship between the sale of luxury cars and unemployment levels, or an increase in the sale of ice cream because there was an unusually warm weather? And I specifically picked this picture because I know that when I'm analysing my data research, it's kind of sitting there intently trying to find what relationships and what's the key elements that I can pull out of it. Because not all of the data that's been collected actually needs to be included in our final report that's that's answering our overall objective. So now that we've collected our data and we've analysed it, now we need to put it into a report that describes the insights. So step 5, we're transforming that analysis into the insights, and that is now we're reporting on the findings. So we need to take a clear and objective look at the findings and see how well we've gathered facts to answer that research question, or support or negate that initial hypothesis or that assumption that we had. So that's why it's really important to be super specific and clear right at the very start when we're identifying the problem, so that right through the process, then when we get to the end, we go, oh yes, we can actually answer that now. And it is a bit of a tricky thing to do. So the report of the research usually is in a written format, and that determines the level of detail and supporting data. However, quite often key decision makers actually don't have time to read the full report. So we need to just pull out some summaries and recommendations based on the full findings so that we can present it to key decision makers so that they can use that information to help determine what's the next course of action for the business. So The report that you'll be writing for your next assessment will be a situation analysis to identify the current situation with regards to your cafe business, and you're going to be doing a competitor analysis and some of the solutions to an identified problem. So you're kind of going to be doing a little bit of this for your next for an upcoming assessment. Also, too, for further information on this or doing this in more detail, our subject BX3181 Surveys and Questionnaire Designs really focuses a whole subject where you learn how to undertake market research. Okay, so now we've touched on those 5 steps of the marketing research process. So we've determined the scope of our market research, we've selected the research design, and we've collected and prepared the data, analyze that data, and then use that data to give us insights to help us with our decision making. So our next topic that we're going to be discussing is the ethical requirements when it comes to undertaking market research.